From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. President Joe Biden made a visit to Alabama this week. The president toured Lockheed Martin's missile production facility in Pike County, where workers assemble the Javelin anti-tank missiles the United States is supplying to Ukraine. The president spoke about the critical role these missiles are playing in Ukraine defending itself from Russian invaders.
You really are doing it. You're making a gigantic difference for these poor sons of guns who are under such enormous pressure and firepower. Those javelins I saw, there's 10 for every tank that there is in Ukraine right now. You're changing people's lives. We built the weapons. No, you really did.
There were shockwaves from the Supreme Court this week as a leaked document showed a draft ruling overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade decision. Those were felt here in Alabama as well, where lawmakers over the years have passed various laws restricting abortion, the latest of which bans abortion in any circumstance with no exceptions. State Representative Terry Collins sponsored that law, which is currently blocked by a federal court. She said if the Supreme Court does follow through with overturning Roe, the legislature could revisit the issue and possibly add back some exceptions.
What we did in the legislature in 2019 with a full ban was we concentrated on the issue of Roe versus Wade, which was, is that baby in the womb a person? Is it a child? Is it a baby? And that's the heart of the issue, which is why we didn't have any exceptions, because it didn't matter how the baby was conceived. Is the baby a person? That was the whole issue of Roe versus Wade. We believe science says yes, it is. We believe that Roe versus Wade should have never been passed as conservatives, but we also believe that it's time for the courts, with the science we have now, to review and to look at that issue again. I do think it's a state decision. One of the things I said even back in 2019, in Alabama law, if a drunk driver kills a pregnant woman, they're charged with 2 homicides. So in Alabama law, we already feel like that life in the womb is a child. And I would like all of our laws to support that.
Stephen Stetson of Planned Parenthood is reminding Alabamians that abortion remains legal and available in the state. He said his organization would engage in the legislative process if the question of abortion is sent back to the states.
What we're telling everybody is to remember that abortion is still safe and legal for now. So we want to encourage anybody who's thinking about coming in not to be deterred by the news of the leak. The other thing is that we have been continuing to focus on the fact that it is just a leak. So just because Auburn's playbook leaks before the big game doesn't mean they're going to run those plays. There could be differences between the final holding and what was leaked from the Alito opinion. And in that regard, it's important to withhold exact opinions about it. Obviously, we find it devastating that if that leak becomes law, that's tragic, and it is going to severely restrict access to health care for people in Alabama. But we're not going anywhere, and we rely heavily on the fact that most Alabamians do want to see Roe still be law. So despite the performative laws that have been passed in the past and the demonstration and the bluster, the reality is when they start talking to constituents about real laws that are no longer constrained by federal jurisprudence, I think a lot of lawmakers are going to realize that over 70% of Alabamians still wish that Roe was law. It's 80% nationally, and so we are confident, based on both our work and public opinion, that there is an appetite for keeping abortion safe, rare, and legal.
In 2018, Alabama voters approved a constitutional amendment establishing rights for the unborn and prohibiting state dollars from funding abortion. That amendment could impact any future action the legislature takes on this issue. Alabama's unemployment rate is at a historic low. However, many businesses are still having a hard time finding workers for available jobs. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has the full story.
Changing seasons brings changes in forecast, not just for weather. The outlook for jobs is a hot topic.
We have just announced that we have recently tied our record low unemployment rate of 2.9%, which was where we were at pre-pandemic. So in order to get back to that pre-pandemic record low, it just shows you how quickly Alabama has recovered from the devastating economic effects of the pandemic.
Alabama Department of Labor Communications Director Tara Hutchison says it's been a very busy year of changes.
We've got more jobs available now than we've had in several years. You know, our jobs count continues to increase. We're back over 2 million jobs, which pre-pandemic was a huge landmark for us to reach. And so we've passed that mark yet again. So it's looking really well for anybody who's looking for work here in Alabama.
In recent business and monetary news, a lot of concern has been placed on inflation, but in a close second place, job numbers, and what's being done here in Alabama and across the United States to improve those numbers.
The overwhelming crush of unemployment insurance claims has receded, which we're all thankful for, but we still have folks who have some outstanding issues. There's still a backlog in unemployment that, you know, unfortunately is just, it's due to how many claims that were filed.
Hutchison says there are plans to help bring more jobs to the state, including hosting new job fairs.
Next week, we're going to actually jump back into our large organized job fairs in Tuscaloosa on Tuesday. We are hosting a very large job fair there with more than 100 employers and more than 3,000 available jobs. That's going to be at Shelton State next Tuesday from 9 to 1.
For Capital Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
We are all familiar with the signing day ceremonies for high school athletes choosing a college. Some local schools are celebrating students choosing career paths or job training to celebrate and encourage that progress. Capital Journal's Karen Goldsmith has the story.
In Montgomery this week, it was signing day, but not the kind that reveals a student's collegiate athletic choice. It was the second annual career signing day.
We talk a lot about ACTs and GPAs and things like that, and all that is so very, very important. Now you're making the next step, and you're fixing to start getting another really important document in your hand, a W-2. So congratulations on that. Keep it up. Great job.
The Montgomery Preparatory Academy for Career Technologies was the site for one of the career signing days. Students there participate in 10 clusters that include dozens of programs, such as plant science, fire science, welding, advertising and design, and electrical technology. They can also be a part of the Jobs for Alabama Graduates Initiative, or JAG. DeJuan Walker with the Hyper Individualized Education Program, or HIED, helps prepare students for life after high school.
One thing that we'd like to get your students to understand is if you're a junior, you're going into your senior year, January, your senior year, you should know exactly where you're going to transition.
The signees committed to the military, 2- and 4-year schools, as well as to 2 employers, Buffalo Rock and Lear Corporation.
So they are actually hiring some of our students, and these are direct hires. We have students going directly into these positions, and they're going to be making north of $30,000 full benefits, all the things that we didn't have when we had that opportunity, correct?
Thaddeus Sneed is in the school's information technology program. He's already earned 2 computer software certifications. He will attend Trenholm State Technical College, where he's already enrolled. And there were 2 double signees. Jacqueline Jackson is going to work for Buffalo Rock and attend Tennessee State University. Michaela McCoy is attending Marion Military Institute and will join the Alabama Army National Guard.
A lot of times our students here get just as much money to go into the workforce, go to a 2-year technical school, and they're not really showcased. So this is something we hope to build on. Last year I think it was 12. This year we're over 30. Hopefully next year we can get that number up around 100.
For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Next, I'm joined by State Finance Director Bill Poole. Mr. Poole, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Thank you, Todd. Good afternoon.
Let me first start with asking you about prisons, because that's in the news. The state has signed a contract with Cadell Construction. I think it was $663 million to build the first of the prisons. I think 3 prisons. This one would be a male prison in Elmore County. I know you're not the prison commissioner, but you were involved in the financing of this deal. Are you pleased with how it's come along?
Well, I am pleased with the progress heretofore. And the Elmore prison is the specialized prison, so it will have enhanced health care, mental health, educational, workforce training aspects as well. So it is the larger of the 2 anticipated projects, the more complex of the 2 anticipated projects, the most expensive of the 2. So I'm pleased we reached a final agreement with the general contractor. I think it is a fair deal in terms of the state's interest, and look forward to starting that project.
I know that when the legislature passed the prison construction plan, part of it was ARPA money, part of it was borrowed money. In this contract, is there a formula for how much is what, or is it all just in one big pot?
In the contract, it does not prescribe which funds are used for which. So the state used a combination of ARPA funds out of the lost revenue component, a little technical but an important distinction, direct cash from the general fund and a supplemental appropriation, and we will finance the balance via a bond issue.
And speaking of that, there was pushback on the use of those lost revenue ARPA funds, mostly from Democrats here in Montgomery and in Washington, saying that that was not right to spend pandemic relief money sensibly on prison construction. Some even said, hey, we're going to protest to the point where it won't go forward, where they can't be spent. And yet there's been a contract signed. Is that an indication that the state's in a good place?
It is. We felt like we were on solid legal grounds in every aspect relative to the ARPA funds, or else we would not have proceeded in that regard. So we had legal opinions. We checked with the variety of resources and sources that we needed to check with, and so we felt like we were on very sound ground. Now, at that point, we were in an interim guidance from Treasury. That was 8 or 9 months ago, which I think time has passed, and then the final guidance issued, it did not contradict what the state had appropriated, and we believe we continue to be on very sound ground as it relates to those funds. So unless Congress or the Treasury changes the rules, then the rules as they were prescribed and are prescribed, we believe we're on sound footing.
Well, speaking of ARPA, in January, the legislature appropriated more than $700 million of those funds. It was, a lot of broadband, rural broadband internet, a lot of water and sewer. Mm-hmm. So you could say that the appropriating was the easy part, right? They had to vote on. I think they were unanimous, passed bills. But as the finance director, you've got to go spend this money. That's probably the hard part. How does that process work?
Well, it's an arduous process, but it's an important process. So we made clear internally in the governor's office and in the finance department that we wanted to ensure that we were efficient and effective as it relates to communicating how the dollars would be allocated to the various stakeholders and recipients, how applications would be screened, and that we would deploy the funds as quickly as possible, because these are relief funds and they're federal one-time funds, and so they needed to get into the field. We've, I think, made substantial progress. We've gotten all of the health care funding out. We're working on announcements will soon be forthcoming on the initial water and sewer projects. The broadband issues are complex. They will take a little longer, but we have made a lot of progress in terms of the state's broadband plan. And as it relates to all of those issues, and there are other ARPA funds that have been appropriated as well, and we're administering to volunteer fire departments, rescue squads, telemedicine, a variety of public needs. But we have an opportunity in the state as it relates to these one-time funds to invest in health care, broadband build-out in rural areas that don't have broadband, water and sewer infrastructure in areas that either have seen growth or areas that don't have clean water or functional septic systems. So we have a lot of opportunity to use these dollars, but every state has these dollars. So whether we agree or not with the federal decision to provide the dollars, every state has the dollars. Every state's playing by the same rules in terms of what is eligible to spend. And it's going to be critical that we spend the dollars and invest the dollars in a manner that leaps us forward competitively as it relates to other states, so that when the dust settles and the federal money dries up, and it's going to run out, and we know that, and we're planning for that in terms of one-time investments and not putting our economy, our citizens in a difficult spot. We hope to be in a position to have improved our competitive position as related to other states that we're competing with for jobs, health care, economic development opportunities, high wages, talent recruitment, quality of life, all of those things.
So when it comes to actually spending these funds, I know that a lot of the different state agencies are involved. Environmental Management, ADEM on the water and sewer side, ADECA on the broadband side. So how much of it is the Department of Finance spending the money versus the agencies, and do y'all work together?
Well, we work together, but the large chunks here in terms of broadband and water and sewer are being administered by ADECA in the case of broadband and ADEM in the case of water and sewer. So as it relates to water and sewer, those are very technical issues. We have water systems all over the state. I think we have over 1,100 water and sewer systems. Well, in finance, we don't really know who those are. We don't know the status of those systems, who's in trouble, who's not, who needs growth, what those complications are, but ADEM does. So they are the natural, I think, agency to administer those funds pursuant to some oversight and direction from finance to ensure that we're compliant with Treasury regs, reporting regs, the intent of the legislature, so on and so forth. So in that case, and also as ADECA, it's a team effort, but we're certainly relying substantially on the subject matter expertise of the respective agencies.
Last time you were here, we talked about supply chain issues, also inflation, and how that could affect some of the use of these funds. I'm not sure about the supply chain, but inflation has gotten worse and is getting worse. Is there a concern at all that these dollars won't go as far as maybe we expected them to?
Well, no dollars, whether they're private dollars, family dollars, or public infrastructure dollars, are going to go as far as they were going to go 2 or 3 years ago. And in my judgment, inflationary issues are going to continue to ramp up across the country for a variety of reasons related to federal policy, the issue in Ukraine and Russia, a lot of economic components. All of this federal stimulus that is pulsing through the economy is also driving up demand relative to shortness of supply in terms of supply chain interruptions, so on and so forth. So yes, I don't think the dollars will buy as it relates to the broadband and water and sewer infrastructure as much as it would have 2 or 3 years ago. I think that's beyond dispute. But under the federal guidance, we have a limited time to spend it. So the feds have put in place certain rules. We will abide by those, as will every other state. But as states expend all of these ARPA dollars, and states are just beginning that, that's going to further exacerbate some inflationary issues, some supply chain issues, and I think it's going to be hard to complete the projects within the statutory timeline as prescribed by the Congress. So those timelines may have to loosen up. So it is an unusual and challenging position that the feds have put us in as a state, as all states are going through this. Municipalities and county governments that have received ARPA funds are grappling with the same thing, but we must administer the funds pursuant to the federal rules, and we will do that.
Let's look ahead to the next round of ARPA funding. What we're talking about now is really only the half. Mm-hmm. We're going to get the second half, $1.1 billion.
Correct.
This summer sometime. There's talk of a special session being called to appropriate those funds. So what is the conversation? What priorities are in the conversation between you, the governor, legislative leaders in terms of what this next tranche of money might be spent on?
Well, a couple points that I think are important. One is there's been no decision whatsoever at this point in time as to whether or not or when we would have a special session. So I think those decisions remain out there in the summertime after further consultation with legislative leadership, which needs to occur first. Secondly, I think Governor Ivey, to her enormous credit, made very clear as it relates to the first round of ARPA, a general principle, which was we need to invest these dollars wisely and not spend them casually. They are one-time funds. These are not recurring revenues. These are taxpayer dollars. They need to be treated with respect. But as a state, we need to invest them for a purpose and not just casually spend them. I think the legislature did a fantastic job of sticking to those principles as it relates to the first round of ARPA appropriations. We need to adhere to those principles again without any compromise as it relates to the next round of ARPA. So what that would foreshadow to me is further investments in infrastructure investments, healthcare, broadband, water and sewer, issues like that, that when you make those investments, they're tangible and they exist for generations. When we build out or improve water and sewer systems, It's there for 40, 50, 60 years. When we improve broadband access, the impact of that is lasting. It is not a fleeting program that goes away at the end of a fiscal year. That tangible infrastructure and those capabilities last over a long period of time, generating a greater rate of return for the state of Alabama for the benefit of our citizens, our prosperity, our ability to have economic success, to be competitive with other states. So I would hope and I would expect that those same principles will apply in the second round as they did in the first round.
We obviously saw record budgets this year. We saw record general fund budget, record education trust fund budget. They also repaid the Alabama Trust Fund. They put money away in rainy day accounts. So they were trying to be responsible, looking toward the future. We talked about inflation. There's a lot of concern in today's economy that this inflation could cause a recession down the road. We remember how painful that recession back in 2010 was. Should we be concerned that a recession is coming?
Well, I think the answer is yes. And I think if we're not, then we're being irresponsible to some extent, because we know a couple of things. One is, in my judgment, there are a lot of things that are occurring in the economy right now that are not sustainable. I mean, you name it, it's not sustainable. The rate of inflation is not sustainable. We see interest rates climbing. Home prices are somewhat out of control. We see a global conflict across the border. We see supply chain issues. We see the cost of gasoline going up. All of these things are not sustainable at their current trajectories. Compound that with, we know that a lot of those budgetary revenues into the state were anomalies. Those were driven by the financial stimulus. They're not sustainable. We know that that level of growth year over year has never been seen before in the state of Alabama, and we're not going to be able to sustain that. So I think Governor Ivey, again, to her credit and to the legislature's credit also for sticking to those principles, funded reserve accounts, paid off debt, and is really preparing, I think, the fiscal house of this state for economic hard times that are ahead. I believe that they are ahead. I hope that they are not acute. But I think any objective review of the economy at this point, state, national, global, tells us there's problems on the horizon. This looks a lot like the 07-08 period, where there were some really good economic times followed by a difficult time. We've been on approximately 13 years of growth in the economy without any recession. Statistically, you just know that can't last. So I've said the following somewhat jokingly, but I think it illustrates the point. Sooner or later, the sugar high is going to end, and we're going to return to a reality of a normalcy. When does that occur? I don't know, but I think it's important that we are very responsible with taxpayer dollars, understanding that this is an unusual time, trying to anticipate the future, trying to protect the state and its position for the benefit of our citizens as we navigate. We've navigated COVID effectively. We're navigating very unusual economic times right now, I think, effectively. We're going to have economic difficulties ahead, I think, that we will need to navigate. So thinking through those and being responsible and conservative is the appropriate tack. The governor has made that an emphasis. The legislature has done a fantastic job, I think, of sticking to those principles. I'm very pleased with that.
Well, you've been on the job as finance director almost a year now. Are you glad you made the change from legislative to the executive branch?
I am. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm very thankful to Governor Ivey for her trust and confidence that she's placed in me. It is a big role. I take it very seriously. We have a great staff. We have great employees. We have a great team. Very proud of the governor and her leadership. It's a pleasure to work with her and her staff. It's a pleasure to work with the legislature in my new role. The legislative members are colleagues of mine for a number of years. I have that perspective. I hope that benefits me in this job and enables me to perform well on behalf of the state of Alabama and Governor Ivey. But I've enjoyed it. I've learned. It's been very challenging. It's very fast-paced, but I have certainly enjoyed the challenge.
Well, thank you for coming and informing our viewers of all these important issues.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Kim Boswell, Commissioner of the Alabama Department of Mental Health. Commissioner, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
I know it's a big week for y'all, big night. You're having the Biscuits game. It's the Strikeout Stigma Night at Biscuits Stadium. Tell me about this.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to really expose people to the idea of mental health and mental wellness. It certainly is an opportunity to have different providers at the Biscuits game that can tell folks about services that are available, what they need to do to get access to care if they're having a behavioral health issue. And we certainly want people to understand more about the mental health issue. So it's a great opportunity to get out in public and really promote mental well-being.
Are you going to be singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game?
I could sing that,
there you
but
go.
I'm not.
Well, it's also a big week for your department because earlier this week it was announced that 2 more community crisis centers are going to be coming online. And this has been a huge focus over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Where does that bring us statewide?
So that will bring us to 6 crisis centers statewide. The new crisis centers will be in Tuscaloosa and in the Dothan area. And we're just really, really excited and very thankful to the governor for her support. That was a part of her budget. And then, of course, the legislature supported that proposal as well. And so we're very excited to have 6 crisis centers in our more urban areas in the state.
Walk me through what happens at these crisis centers on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm sure you've heard a lot about, it's a big part of the conversation, is we're really trying to keep people who have a mental health issue out of jails and out of emergency departments where they often get boarded. And one of the really effective ways to do that is to have services available when they are in crisis. And so these crisis centers really provide a lot of services that are needed for those individuals. It could be just as simple as they need a good quality screening and assessment. You know, oftentimes we don't know when someone is sometimes picked up by law enforcement or winds up in the ER if what they're seeing is a mental health issue or a substance use issue. And so one of the really effective steps in that process is to get a good screening and assessment so that you know actually what you need to address. They also can receive services in what we call 23-hour observation beds. So again, if they're just kind of having some difficulty and we're really trying to sort out, is it a medication issue? Have they taken some drug that's causing some behaviors that are concerning? Then they can be assessed in that 23-hour observation setting. In addition to that, it provides crisis stabilization services, so a 5 to 7 day stay at the crisis center is possible. So in other words, if we go through all that screening and assessment, we do some observation, and you're still not where you need to be, you can actually stay in a 5 to 7 day crisis stabilization unit there at the crisis center. And so it's an opportunity for folks, instead of law enforcement taking them to jail, they can drop them off at the crisis center. Instead of taking them to the ER where they might not have access to behavioral health services, they can be dropped off at the crisis center, or they can walk in, or a family member can bring them, and they can get the services they need when they're in the middle of a crisis.
And so having them around the state regionally really puts it closer to driving distance of almost anywhere.
Right. So we have centers in Huntsville, Birmingham. We'll have one soon in Tuscaloosa, Montgomery, Mobile, and Dothan. And as you know, for example, we felt like it was really important for Dothan. If you've ever been to Dothan, you know there's no easy way to get to Mobile. There's, no easy way really within a 2-hour driving distance to get to where you need to be. And so Dothan in particular was a little bit of an island because it's hard to get to a Mobile or to a Montgomery. And so that's one of the ones that we were really excited about. One, because it's geographically hard to get to, and 2, because there's been such huge population growth in the Dothan area.
Do you foresee in the future any more than 6? Is there a magic number you're trying to get to?
We're really taking a hard look at that, looking at the population data, looking at some of our more rural areas. We've talked on the show before about mobile crisis teams in the rural areas, and we may need some additional crisis centers, but we really are going to kind of step back and look at the population. What does a really good rural model look like for some communities that are sort of medium size? Do we need to operate more like an urgent care setting? That's one of the models that we've seen across the nation that is really effective in a more rural area, is sort of that urgent care model. But there are several factors that we need to look at: population, just the identified need and availability and access to other services in the area. And so we are going to step back a little bit as we begin to develop our budget proposal for the next year and look at those and really sort of refine where we're going to put those other crisis centers.
You mentioned the budget, and it's just significant that we're talking about growth and
right.
establishing these centers, as opposed to 10 years ago, you're talking dramatic cuts, painful cuts.
Right.
So, I mean, that the budget situation has really turned around, and that's it. Are you in the good place now? Do you see the need for further budget increases in the future?
We do see a need for further budget increases. We are building the infrastructure for what we call the Alabama Crisis System of Care. And that really is, really important to the state in terms of addressing the behavioral health needs in the state. Unfortunately, as you know, with COVID, it's not like the need decreased, the need actually went up. And so the other area that we're really looking at very closely right now is the child and adolescent need in our community, because we've seen such a dramatic impact, negative impact on kids through this COVID crisis, that we really know that we need to expand the services that are available to child and adolescent.
Also passed in this past session was a law changing the commitment process,
right,
particularly for law enforcement and judges. What do people need to know about this change?
It was sponsored by the National Alliance of Mentally Ill here in Alabama and supported by probate judges and also the Association of County Commissioners. It really does expand the amount of time a probate judge can look at the behaviors of the individual. So it gave them a little latitude in terms of, what has the person experienced over the last 2 years, instead of just what's happening right now with that individual. It also changed the definition of near and present danger a little bit to include if the individual is unable to care for themselves and therefore in danger of really being taken advantage of. That's what we see so often with our individuals, is because of their mental health condition, they're unable to take care of themselves, and that's when we often see them victimized by others because they're unable to function and take care of themselves. But previously that had not been a part of the commitment law. But we, supported by all of the advocacy groups, a lot of states have done something similar, and the advocacy groups felt really strongly about expanding sort of that definition so that we can get people where they need to be and being taken care of and getting the services that they need.
Also in the budget this year was the education budget was funding for every school district to make sure every school district in the state has at least one mental health coordinator. Is your department involved in that?
We are. We help train those service coordinators. We work closely with State Department of Education to operate what we call a multi-tiered system for individuals in schools. That's what we call a Tier 2 intervention, the service coordinators. Tier 1 is the universal intervention. The school systems do a lot of work around suicide prevention and at risk at that Tier 1 level. Service coordinators are at Tier 2, trying to really identify kids who are struggling, get them to where they need to be. The money that we received is Tier 3 intervention, which means putting a school mental health therapist into that local school system. So if the service coordinator is identifying a kid that seems to need more intervention or needs, some intensive intervention, then they're referred to the mental health therapist to do those interventions. And so all of that, really, that multi-tiered system means that all of those different tiers are coordinated really by that service coordinator. That was one of the big reasons that Representative Ledbetter and others really wanted to add that service coordinator, is you really needed that person who was trying to have that comprehensive view of services within the school system.
I also noted that this is the first time that the state has appropriated funding for substance abuse really since the 1970s.
Right.
That seems pretty significant.
It's huge. I was excited about a lot of things in the budget, but that was one of the things that was really huge for our department, to add residential treatment beds to our list of services. It's 4 centers around the state, 16 beds, 4 in different regions, and so we're just so excited to add those residential treatment beds in our state, because we have long waiting lists for substance abuse treatment, and those beds can make a huge positive impact for people in our state. We've been able to decrease the number of opioid prescriptions in this state, but unfortunately not able to decrease the number of overdoses. And so we still have a huge opioid problem that we're dealing with, and other drugs as well. And so those treatment beds really can make a huge difference in the lives of Alabamians.
And fentanyl seems to be such a big problem, especially in terms of overdose. It just seems that conversation has finally shifted from, sort of locking those people up to treating them,
right,
especially substance abuse treatment.
Absolutely. And we've been running a series called Stop Judging, Start Healing. And so we've really worked hard, and it kind of ties back to the stigma issue, to say to folks, really we need to be helping these individuals, and it's not a character issue, it's an addiction. It's a physical addiction to a drug, and oftentimes, people get involved in it not because they meant to. Maybe they had a health issue and were prescribed an opioid. And so really trying to help folks understand there's a great deal of compassion needed to address addiction, and that really it's not a character issue, it's a health issue, and we really, at this point, really work hard to keep folks alive long enough to be able to go to treatment. And that's really our biggest challenge right now, is so many people wind up overdosing, that one of our goals is sort of harm reduction. Can we keep them alive long enough to where they can have a treatment bed? And obviously having 4 16-bed residential treatment programs in the state means they don't have to sit on a waiting list for a long time to get treatment.
Mm-hmm. When I talk to Cam Ward at Pardons and Paroles, when I talk to lawmakers that are involved in the prison issue specifically, they always bring up mental health, and the idea that failing to get it right on mental health on the front end can lead to incarceration for people who really don't need to be incarcerated, need to be treated. I know that there's a new men's prison on the way in Elmore County, and part of that is they're going to have a facility for mental health. Is your department involved in that as well?
We are involved with Pardons and Parole. Our role really is on the front end and then kind of on the back end. You may have seen the press release related to the Perry County facility that Pardons and Parole is going to open soon. That's really going to kind of be their hub for mental health services. And so we are very engaged with them about what that's going to look like. I think they're going to issue an RFP during the summer for some mental health providers in the state to be able to provide the mental health services there. And so really for us, we try to prevent that person from going to prison. That's a lot of the crisis centers and some other programs that we've been working on. And then when they're coming out, we have a very wonderful working relationship with Director Ward. We've had many conversations about the day reporting centers, about the Perry County facility, and how can we really wrap around those mental health and substance use services so that when those individuals leave Pardons and Parole, they are engaged in the community, they're healthy, and they've addressed their mental health issues.
Lots going on in the Department of Mental Health. Commissioner, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Next, I'm joined by Bruce Ely of the Bradley Arant Law Firm. Bruce, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Todd, it's good to see you. It's been fun to watch you grow up. I even wore my Auburn tie just for you today. So
well, yeah, me too.
As close as I could get anyways.
Well, I was looking forward to having you on because you are a tax attorney, a well-known tax attorney, especially in legislative circles, both in Washington, D.C. and here in Montgomery, because of your work in an advisory capacity on tax legislation. Can you tell us more about your work in that area?
I've been honored to serve as counsel or technical advisor to, I think, every tax reform commission or constitutional reform commission that we've had since at least '92 with the Torbert Commission, my friend Bo Torbert. And that really gave me an interest in legislative matters. And I did spend some time in Washington, Senator Shelby, on and off, but I found our Alabama legislature to be incredibly productive, friendly people to work with, and in need of some tax expertise. I've been doing this now for almost 40 years and have gone through a lot of legislators, a lot of governors, and a lot of commissioners of revenue. But I've been proud to serve either through the Business Council of Alabama or the Birmingham Chamber or simply my law firm, sometimes the Alabama Law Institute, which is another group, great group going on. So you see me pop up in a lot of different places. You see my fingerprints on a lot of these bills that passed over the last 38 years at least on the tax side. But I guess I'm especially proud of the incentive bills that we passed for the Mercedes project many years ago and those sort of things that have really become long-lasting legacy type bills. So now, you know, I watch this regularly. Thankfully, some clients hire me to take a look at some of these bills, sometimes to draft them for them as well. So I'm sort of tasked with keeping up with all the things that filter through the legislature on the tax side. I'm not going to tell you about permitless carry and all those
yeah.
odd things, but I can certainly speak to you about any of the tax legislation that passed this last session.
Well, yeah, that's what I was hoping, because it was an active session for tax legislation. It was purposeful. They came in with a lot of revenue and wanted to at least give some back in form of tax cuts, different kind of incentives. Let's start with the first one, House Bill 82. Mm-hmm. This is called the Small Business Relief and Revitalization Act. Walk me through what this does.
Well, I mean, it's a great title. You start out with a title like this and everything else falls from there, but it really accomplishes four things. One is, well, let me go back a step. Last session, the legislature passed some bills that cleared up some problems with all this stimulus legislation that either Trump or the Biden administration in Congress had passed, because a lot of these things, they might be tax-free to you for federal purposes, but they're taxable to you for Alabama purposes, mm-hmm. and because our laws don't quite sync. So last session, in one 94-page bill, they corrected a lot of those things to make them tax-free. But there was one or two things that slipped through. The restaurants, they fixed at the last minute of last session, but the farmers and ranchers, they didn't quite catch until this bill passed. So the farmers and ranchers who borrowed money from the SBA, who received one of these paycheck protection loans, when those are canceled, and they often are canceled, that creates income to the borrower. And the legislature had to step in and say, no, we're going to follow the federal rule, which means it's exempt. And the money you borrow from the PPP program, SBA, and you spend on crops or animals or equipment, you can deduct those expenses too, which you normally couldn't. So it's a good bill. And again, it's just cleaning up some things from last session. The other thing, and this was a big deal for NFIB and my friend Rosemary Elabash, was to exempt the first $40,000 of business equipment from the personal property tax. Alabama has a fairly steep personal property tax. People don't realize that. But the exemption is about 75% of all Alabama businesses from this. So it's a pretty broad-based exemption, even at $40,000. So that's number two. Three was a number of retailers have to send in a monthly amount of sales tax whether they collect it or not, even if they didn't. So this changed the exemption now, so it's $5,000. If you collected $5,000 in sales tax in prior years, then you have to remit that amount on a going forward basis, and then of course take a credit against what you actually collected. But it really helps some small retailers here. Again, Alabama Retail Association, NFIB move. And finally, the thing that I worked on was this last one, that is to give companies and banks an extra 30 days to file their tax returns, because with all these federal changes, people couldn't keep up with those things. I couldn't. And by the time you were filing your tax return, you're on the last day. I mean, you're April 15th of 11:59 p.m. And these big corporations couldn't get their arms around all these federal bills and all the state ramifications. So thankfully, the legislature gave companies just an extra 30 days to file the return. They have to pay the tax early, but at least they have another 30 days to true up their return and make sure it syncs and it's correct, and with all the funky things we have going on between the federal and state rules. So I listed some companies and manufacturer groups that supported these bills. The governor was behind, of course, the Department of Revenue. So it was a all hands on deck sort of bill.
There was also legislation from Representative Lynn Greer. He labeled it as a tax cut for retirees.
Yeah.
House Bill 162.
Yeah.
What does this do?
I was offended. I'm not a retiree, but I'm 65. But,
okay.
No, I really appreciate Lynn. Lynn has tried several times to get this bill through, and others too. Just to back up, many years ago, the AEA, Dr. Hubbard was right there, Roy Johnson, a group of folks, passed a total exemption for distributions from pension plans. Well, that just so happens to be state employees, federal employees, military employees, and teachers.
But defined contribution, right?
Yeah, defined. So a pension plan means we're going to give you an X amount.
Defined benefit, yeah.
Defined benefit, regardless of what we do in the market. If we lose money in the investment, we're going to give you X dollars a month forever. So those distributions were totally exempt from Alabama tax. That's been the case for probably 25 years. And since then, we've said, well, what about business people? Why can't we receive a similar exemption for distributions from our profit-sharing plans, which are, as you know, defined contribution plans, or my IRA or my 401k? So finally, Lynn's help and a number of others, this bill voted out 100-0 in the House, so it was pretty popular. They reduced the number to $6,000 a year, but hey, I'll take it. It's a good start to bring some parity between profit-sharing plans and pension plans. And again, you're not seeing many pension plans out there anymore. That's almost all 401ks anyway. So this is going to be a useful exemption that starts next year, not this year, and you have to be at least 65. So again, I appreciate the legislature helping me out a little bit on that one.
And I'm really going to need your help with this one, because we've reported on it, we've tried to explain it, but I keep having trouble. The optional standard deduction changes to that law.
Yeah.
It's House Bill 163. Can you walk me through what this does?
I will. It's one of these things where when it started out, it seemed to be a much bigger tax break than it is today, because inflation in the last few months has just skyrocketed. So I really hope the legislature will come back next year and revisit these numbers, because I do think they did help low-income taxpayers. They gave them an extra $1,000 standard deduction. They gave them larger dependent exemptions for children and so forth. But in the scheme of things, with inflation running at like 9%, they basically just went back to a net neutral with all these things. So the legislature certainly tried hard. Now, you look around, you've seen North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, and some other states go through some massive overhauls to lower their rates, give low-income taxpayers some very helpful tax breaks. So I hope the legislature will revisit this issue next session.
So would you say that this is more targeted toward middle and low-income folks and those who don't itemize?
Yeah,
right?
This is, you wouldn't use a standard deduction if you're itemizing, if you had a lot of charitable contribution deductions or taxes or what have you, but most people in Alabama don't itemize.
Mm-hmm. So you see this maybe as an opportunity in the future for more targeted, broader tax relief on lower middle income?
I hope we'll see that. Again, if we follow Mississippi and Georgia's pattern, I think we're going to have to just to be competitive. But again, with inflation running rampant the way it is, these increases, while they sound great and are certainly going to be helpful, they've pretty much been eaten up in the last few months because of just grocery prices and gas prices and so forth. So I really hope the legislature comes back and takes a second look at this next spring.
Well, let me ask you about that. Speaking of groceries, every year for the last at least 20 years, there's been talk of ending the sales tax on groceries. And every year it doesn't pass, right? And I guess there are lots of reasons for that, but you would have thought that this year, with all the revenue, if there was ever a year for it to pass, it would have been this year. What do you think the the big hang up with that is.
Well, it's all about money. And I was one of those people who tilted at windmills thinking this would be the year that it was finally passed, because we were awash with money, both good economy and all the federal money, but it still didn't pass. It is to just take the 4% off of sales tax is over a $500 million hit. It's an education too. That even makes it even more special.
So you could be accused of cutting funding for schools. Is that
exactly?
Okay.
That's what you hear. So, in many of the prior bills, what they said was, tell you what, we'll take the food tax off the table, or we'll exempt the food, and in return, we'll repeal your federal income tax deduction, because that's extremely rare. We're only one of 3 states that has that left. Other states have repealed theirs. So, that was an idea that came up as House Bill 173. It looks like. And my point was, there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. I drafted a bill several years ago through the Birmingham Business Alliance that said, let's follow the ways of Idaho and Kansas and some other states and give you a refundable tax credit. So we don't take the food off of everybody's income. I don't deserve that, a break on my groceries, but the low-income taxpayers do. So you could target this to just help low-income taxpayers and nobody else, not the people driving through the state to the beach or the underground economy or high-income taxpayers, just low-income folks. So I hope that the legislature will take a look at that idea next year, because the fiscal note was about 1/10 of what this fiscal note is. It really is like $40 million, $45 million versus over $500 million. I mean, it's $500 million, just the 4%. Cities and counties are not neutral either, because the pressure on them is, if we repeal the state 4%, they're going to feel pressure to repeal their numbers. And if you look at, even if it's an 8% rate, you're looking at $1 billion here of tax going away like that. If the cities and counties were either forced to or felt they had to repeal their own sales tax.
No small thing. Yeah.
It's a lot of money. And again, I think there's a better way to skin the cat, and I hope the legislature will look at it next year.
Well, one of the big developments that maybe goes unnoticed in the last couple of years has been the stabilization and really the growth in the general fund. I mean, this is the part of the state budget that was always having problems because there was very little growth revenue.
Right.
That changed with the simplified seller's use tax. I guess it passed back in 2018 or maybe before. I know that you were very involved in that, so I was hoping you could kind of walk us through how that idea came about and what it took to get it passed.
Yeah, if you go back beyond that, there's this thing called the streamlined sales tax that about 20 states are members of. And I pushed, along with the Retail Association, BATC, Business Council, Birmingham Chamber, for Alabama to join the streamlined sales tax, because that would have required good things and bad things to the cities. The cities could not audit anymore. You'd have one audit for all levels of government, state, county, city, and all the cities and counties in the state. So if somebody went to Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, to audit them, they'd be auditing on behalf of the state and all the counties and cities. So they have one audit rather than 400 audits or whatever it might be. The cities really didn't like that at all. I got run over like a possum. So the simplified seller's use tax came in as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling in Wayfair several years ago that said you don't have to have a warehouse or an office or a person in the state. If you simply have a certain amount of dollars of sales in that state, and the state has a simplified mechanism for collecting the sales tax and being audited, then we're going to let that go. No more physical presence, just what's called economic nexus. And in that case, the threshold was $250,000 a year sales. So the states jumped on that immediately after Wayfair, and Alabama was at the forefront, to their credit. So that the Amazons of the world, they may not, even if they had a warehouse, in which they do now, a lot of the companies are totally virtual. They're in California. Mm-hmm. They're now having to collect sales tax from you and me and remit it to the state. But the deal is, it's one-stop shopping. They remit a flat 8%. They're audited by only the State Department of Revenue. They file one form, not forms in Shelby County and Columbiana and Mobile, and just one form. So the company said, okay, that's fine. That's the deal right there. We like that. That's fair. The question, though, is what's the fair rate? Because there are very few parts of this state that have an 8% total rate. It's going to be 4 plus 3 plus 3, whatever. I mean, the average rate is around 9.5% now. In Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery, Huntsville, it's 10. You have some places that are 11. So as we were talking about before the break, is why should Amazon only collect 8% on a book that I purchase, whereas if I go to Books A Million, I have to pay 10%.
At the store.
At the store.
In a city that has a higher
Yeah,
tax.
yeah. So the cities and counties have a good point there, I think. And the cities have been complaining that they're not receiving their fair share of the money because half the money automatically goes to the state and then half goes to the counties and cities based on population. And the Hoovers of the world are saying, hey, we're a retail mecca. We should receive more than our share based on population. Tuscaloosa has the same complaint. So the number of the cities have gotten together, they call it the Big Ten cities, and they're really going to, I think, push some legislation next session to increase that rate to maybe, 9 or 10%. And I can't blame them. It's a level playing field to me for in-state retailers. If I have to collect 10% from you if you come to my store, and Amazon wants to collect 8 if you buy from virtually, then in large enough dollars, people can take that into consideration of where they're going to purchase something. So it's been a boon to the state. It's brought in millions and millions of dollars, been very successful. But on the other hand, I think the rate's probably a bit low and needs to be equalized among out-of-state and in-state retailers, so there's some fairness there.
Well, that's certainly something to watch. Lots of good information and things to look forward to in the future. Bruce, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Todd. Good to see you again.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next Friday night at 7:30 here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.